Hi guys, welcome back to another I Measure You research review. Research review number 10 actually. We are joined this week by Elliott Hall, and Elliott's going to be talking us through his latest research paper titled An Injury Audit into High-Level Male Youth Soccer Players from English, Spanish, Uruguayan and Brazilian academies. So without further ado, I will pass the floor over to Elliott. So just bear with me 1 second. What I'll probably do is I'll share my screen so we have the paper on our background as well. So we should have the paper up there. So Elliott, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk us through your paper. Before we actually dive in, it'd be great to find out a little bit more about yourself. So where you are and what you're currently up to.
Yeah, I'm currently living in Liverpool. So I did my PhD at Liverpool John Moores University, and this paper we're speaking about today is the first publication from that. I'm currently doing a postdoc at Manchester Metropolitan University, which Liverpool Manchester is about 40 minutes in the car. So it all worked out quite well in terms of not having to move from my house or anything. It's just a slight continuation from some of the research I looked at in my PhD, but some of it's slightly different in that I looked at injuries before in academy football players, as we'll speak about, and I'm now investigating concussion. And we're doing that via high-level or elite-level rugby players.
Cool.
Good stuff.
Elliott, yeah, sorry, just from my side, that's quite, I mean, you alluded to it a little bit there. So, I mean, with this paper, how did that come about? And what, you obviously mentioned a couple of points there. So how did this paper, start?
Yeah, it's quite like a bit of a story behind this paper, and it's always good to give a bit of context. So my PhD was looking at injuries in academy football players, and we were looking at 3 different risk factors. So they're kind of genetics, maturation and playing position, and where there's papers related to those that we've hoping to publish soon. So when we realised, like once we'd collected all the data, we realised that we probably, for ourselves, need to understand the data we've got better so we know what we're looking at, and that we realised that just reporting what injuries we had would have been almost too big for those as individual studies. On the flip side of it as well, we wanted to look at our data and work out, okay, have we got the injuries that we expected to get, because that's what our investigation is going to be based on. So if we'd based our investigations of risk factors on injuries, which we believed based on previous work to be the most common, but if we then looked at our data and it was different, then the whole flow of the research and the PhD could come into question. So that was, it was probably about a year before the end of my PhD when we were starting to really put everything together. We realised, okay, maybe actually for the people that are going to be reading the PhD thesis, we need to have a chapter almost right at the start and saying, okay, we've investigated to find out, is injury a problem? It is, and this is the exact nature of it. And that then led into the rest of it. So at the start, from when the inception of the idea was really just a descriptive chapter, but then we realised because we had players from different countries and different age groups, there was maybe more potential to the data we had in terms of publication. So that's how it got to where it is now.
Oh, great stuff, great stuff. So in terms of the research in question, what were your specific objectives when you set out, and what did you hypothesize?
Yeah, so for this specific paper, we wanted to, the main aims and objectives were to find and quantify which were the most commonly occurring injuries in terms of the tissues that were injured and where they were located on the body. So with a view to, if you know what types of injuries happen and where they're occurring on the body, hopefully practitioners, medical staff, A, can try and prevent them, but B, can have some expectation of maybe what they're going to be dealing with the most when they're dealing with this specific population. We also wanted to look at just how much time was lost to injuries in this population, and was that different according to the age of the players. So we expected, based on previous literature, that muscles, ligament and tendons, so your soft tissues, would be the most commonly injured. We didn't really have much of a hypothesis in relation to different age groups at this point, although that was something we looked at in the maturation which followed. As we had different countries, no previous study had looked at different countries within the same study. So there are injury audits done in different countries, but in separate papers. And they were all fairly similar. So we wanted to make a comparison, but we didn't actually anticipate that there would be any real difference, because from what we'd seen from countries separately, there wasn't. So we had no reason to believe it would be different when we looked at it. So we hypothesized very little difference in terms of countries. And they were the main two aims of this paper, because if our data, as I'd said before, if that differed from what we'd anticipated, we may have to change what we did after this. And B, if we found that there was a difference in injuries between countries, then in every other part of our research that followed this, we would have to take into account which countries the players were from.
Fascinating. All right, Elliott, I mean, you've got a number of countries there. One question I would love to know is, how did you go about it, and how did you collect this data and get such a large cohort?
Yeah, it is, and to me it was just kind of what we did. But actually, when you step back, it is quite a niche collection of countries and players to have, and I guess it was a challenge, but it's also a significant plus point. So in relation to the other chapters we're looking at, one of the main ones is looking at genetic variation, which hasn't really been done before. So that kind of, the feelers were out for that, so to speak, before I started the PhD. And this PhD was a scholarship in that it was the PhD, the research questions were already set out, and then they matched it with a candidate, as opposed to myself deciding this is what we're going to look at. So samples had been collected from the Uruguayan players from a previous study or PhD, which wasn't looking at injuries, it was looking at performance. And there'd been a trip to Brazil to discuss this project just before I started, but no samples were collected. So at the point of where I started, there was a couple of links with the Brazilian and Uruguayan countries, and it was more a case of, okay, how do you collect your injuries? Can you do it this way? Could we then organise to collect some samples from the Brazilians? For the other clubs, all the UK-based clubs and the Spanish club, they came about through kind of conversations or about the research, and then from that it was, okay, well, could we look for you? Would you be willing to participate? Can we approach your players and the parents of players from then on? So collecting data for this was mainly collected in a standardised format and then sent to myself, and then we had to analyse it all. But as it's related to the wider project, a lot of the recruitment and the collection of other data, which is addressed in other chapters, was a case of me going certainly to all the UK-based clubs, and we spent a week in Spain at an academy, just rounding up everybody and anybody that wanted to take part. So yeah, it's challenging, and even though I wasn't personally in Brazil collecting data, actually kind of making sure the saliva samples were collected properly, and the whole scenario of actually getting those shipped to the UK was quite a big challenge, just with customs, etc. And the consumables are quite expensive, so we were really, you don't want things to go missing, etc. So there was a lot of challenges beyond sport and exercise science related to this project, but a really good experience.
Fantastic. And obviously there were a lot of data subjects. There's a lot of injuries, as you can see on the screen there. So I'm gonna put it to you, Elliott. Can you kind of briefly go over what you found? What were the main findings of your research?
Yeah. So if you look at the whole cohort as a whole, which is I'll go through the table in a second, and that gives us a bit more detail about specific age groups, which I guess really is what people are more interested in, because if you're a coach, a physio, etc., the likelihood that you're working with the whole spectrum is quite low. So across the whole cohort, we observed that muscle injuries, ligament injuries, and growth-related injuries were the three most common when we combined every single age group, and that the thigh, the knee, and the ankle were the most common locations of those injuries. So then when you actually go into this table, we listed here the top three most occurring injuries, either by location on the left, and type on the left, and location on the right. So in age groups under 14 and below, growth-related injuries were consistently within the top three. So that has a lot to do with biological maturation, and there's a lot of research going on in that, and it's a hot topic, and I think it always will be, because no matter how much things may change, there's nothing we can do about that physiological process in terms of changing when it happens for an individual. When players reach under 14 or under 13, muscle injuries do start to appear within the top three, and from under 14 onwards, they are the most common injury type for every age group. That, I believe, coincides or explains why the thigh on the location column is also, from under 15s onwards, the most commonly injured site. So that's your quadriceps and your hamstrings. And 11% of all the injuries that we recorded across the whole cohort were to the hamstrings. Ligament injuries were common in every single age group. They appear in the top three, from under 9s all the way up to the oldest age groups. Also, we looked at injury severity, which is basically looking at the burden of injury, which is displayed in the table, the figure just below the table. So what we're looking at here is minimal, mild, moderate, and severe are in ascending order to how many days were missed according to the injuries. And anything on this figure in a black bar, so shaded in black, it represents the proportion of injuries that required or took more than 4 weeks for that player to get back to training or competition. And there was a significantly greater proportion of those severe injuries at under 14s and under 16s. Under 14s was the highest, and that's of particular interest because it's about the age of 14 where males undergo peak height velocity, which is effectively the sharpest point of biological maturation. And that is the main point of focus for most studies of bodily change around about that area. So that was a really interesting finding, and one which I would definitely highlight for anybody wishing to investigate maturation and injuries moving forward. The other things, just kind of more smaller findings, I would say, is we didn't find massive differences between countries, which we didn't really expect to find that anyway. There were a couple, and we didn't see a distinct pattern as a collective of all the countries or clubs in terms of what's called seasonal variation, so where injuries occur in the season. It was slightly different for every academy, not just every country. So that would lead me to suggest that, yes, be aware of players not playing and training for a while, and an increase in training might increase injury risk due to deconditioning, but it doesn't seem to be something that's common to every single academy. So there might be different practices within different academies that kind of mean that is more or less of a problem. I think those are really the main findings of the paper.
Awesome. How is this, when I say inform future research, your future research, what future research has come from this, and do you believe might come from this as well?
So from this, we obviously followed it by, and we'd planned to do it anyway. So the finding about the severe injuries around age 14 was really interesting, because that was something we were intending to look at anyway. So we followed that. So research which I know will follow this from my perspective, because we've done it, is looking at maturation, looking at playing position and looking at genetic variation. And we looked at genetic variation, and we actually ended up doing that according to the maturation status of the player, because we found that there was something to do with that maturation status. I know there's other people investigating injuries, looking at maturation as well, in academies, in English academies, high level. So that's going to be really interesting as well. And having spoken to some of those individuals about the way that they're looking at injuries, it is slightly different to the way we looked at it. And I think that research and the way I did it will if you look at them both in combination, will be complementary to each other. But I think the gold standard, if you really wanted to look and do this kind of study again, and it'd be very, very challenging on a scale of this many players and clubs and the amount of people involved, would be to have, say, 3 or 4 countries again. You would be required to have from each of those countries 3 or 4 teams, because we had 5 English teams, but the rest was actually 1 team from each country, which is a limitation. So you would want to have 3 or 4 countries, 3 or 4 clubs. So already you're on 12, 16 clubs, and we had 8 here. You'd want to look hopefully at all the age groups across, again with an even representation of 100 or more players from each age group. And you'd ideally want to follow those players, particularly the ones between 12 and 16, across 2, 3, 4 seasons, so you can actually track, as they are maturing physically, is there any relationship with their injuries? Now that's very, very difficult to do, and would take a lot of organisation. But I don't think it's inconceivable for that kind of work to be done with the correct planning. And I don't know, if it happened, I'd love to be part of it, but I'm not going to be the one that organises it, because I know how much work it would take. But if anybody did really want to kind of get the funding and do that sort of work, then it would be fantastic, and it would answer a lot of questions for this research area. And I think it would probably be one of the best studies ever done. But I say that for a reason, in recognising how difficult it would be.
I think you're right. I think it's a really important area to research as well, given the fact that during these years the up and coming footballers are having the most exposure to kind of technical, tactical and physical training. And if they're spending a lot of time away from that due to injury, then that's undoubtedly going to hamper their progress, isn't it? So I think it's really important to look at in greater detail in the future, whoever can take the reins on that research. Elliott, in terms of the further research from your PhD that you mentioned, when can we expect that to be published? We've lost him.
I thought it was me for a second.
We'll see if we can get him back. We'll have to.
I'm sure. We'll help.
Have to keep the crowd entertained for a while, James. Tell us a joke.
No pressure at all. Let's just throw you up on the spot with a joke. Oh no, man. Oh, well, there we go. It seems like we're getting him back. I think Elliott has just saved me. Yes, he's back. Oh, is he?
You might still have to tell us a joke, James.
Oh no, I don't know my crowd, so I can't give an age-appropriate joke, unfortunately. I don't know the crowd on this at the moment.
We'll give him one more go to get back.
No. But I mean, fascinating paper, and
yeah,
I'm just impressed by the volume of it. Really.
Are you back, Elliott?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I was still moving. You guys froze, and then it kicked me out and come back in. Apologies, I don't know what that is.
No problem. I asked James to tell me a joke, and he didn't tell me a joke, so I'm not too happy. I was just saying, in terms of your the further work from your PhD, the stuff around maturation, when can we expect to see that published?
As soon as possible, hopefully. Some of it's in review. Some of it's in review at the moment.
Okay.
So that and another study are currently in review. I know at the moment things may be taking slightly longer just because journals are receiving a lot more articles because everybody seems to have a bit more time to write, as I did as well. So hopefully in the next couple of months, unless maybe we aren't successful and have to submit elsewhere. But I would really hope within the next couple of months.
Okay, no, that's great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and talking us through your research. It's always better, we feel, when we have the researcher actually doing the talking and we can just ask the question. So we do appreciate it. James, do you have any final comments before we wrap this up?
No, nothing from my end. Just great paper, Elliott, and thanks for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
No problem at all. And yeah, thanks for having me on. It's always good to kind of speak about work and explain it a little better for the readers.
No, perfect. And just quickly, Elliott, if any of our viewers want to reach out to you, what's the best means? Is that by Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter probably the best, or email. But I would say Twitter. Do you have that? Do you want me to kind of explain my Twitter handle? Or
yeah, if you can give your Twitter handle a shout out.
It's my full name, but the last two L's is number 1. So it's at Elliott. So that's ELLIOTTHA11.
Perfect. Thank you, mate. We'll share those details anyway, and we'll also share the full paper. But that brings us to an end, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon.